The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small, trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old, beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty, no sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death. Mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know." "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess, ghost stories, miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then, the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for. Solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moved by the creek. Their outlines were faint but unmistakably human. They moved as if they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night. The miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes. Other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, Slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well. But now, my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. "Jack?" The voice was faint, distorted, as if it were coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. "Jack, help me." I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is this?" No answer, just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time clearer, like the static was peeling away. "Jack, why didn't you come back?" I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. "Get a grip, Slick," I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights blinking faintly just off the edge of the road, where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. "Jack." The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop it!" I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. "You're not real." But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the static, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. "You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown." The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea. And now here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive. Something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo. It was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences, moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer, fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them I saw Dave. His eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me." His voice echoed in my head. You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift, and then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engines sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet. But the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet. And neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing, until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words, but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers. 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere, maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of grey through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense, I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals. Glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We see you." The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. "For once," I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note, just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the farther I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. I was halfway up Blackwater Ridge when Glenn warned me about the lights. His bait shop was the last stop before the mountain trail turned into pure wilderness, and I dropped in for some extra firewood. He was standing behind the counter, leaning on his elbows, watching me load up my supplies. His words hung in the air long after they left his mouth. "People get lost up there," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You hear the stories?" I zipped up my jacket and shook my head. What stories? About the lights. They show up when the sun goes down, start flickering in the trees like they're leading you somewhere. But you follow them. You don't come back. I should have known better than to brush him off. I should have asked more questions. But the truth was, I didn't care. I wasn't here for ghost stories or local superstitions. I was here to clear my head after everything that had happened with Ryan. The breakup, the endless nights of replaying every argument in my head. I needed this time away from the world. Just me and my RV parked in the middle of nowhere. Blackwater Ridge had seemed perfect. A remote place where no one could find me, and more importantly, where I wouldn't be tempted to find anyone. "I'll be fine," I told Glenn, trying to smile, but his eyes were serious, unblinking. "Just watch yourself," he said, handing me a small pouch as I paid for the wood. "Keep this with you. Some folks say it helps." "What is it?" "Just something my family's passed down," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Might keep the lights away." I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but I pocketed the pouch anyway, more out of politeness than anything else. Then I left the shop, got into my RV, and made my way up the winding mountain road toward Blackwater Ridge. The campsite was exactly what I'd hoped for, deserted, overgrown, and tucked away in a grove of tall pines. The air smelled crisp and clean, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The old campground looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There were a few rusted RVs, half hidden in the foliage, relics of past campers who had either left them behind or forgotten about them altogether. I parked my RV at the far edge of the grove, close enough to the trees to feel enclosed, but far enough from the abandoned vehicles to avoid any weird vibes. It was perfect, a place to disconnect and forget. That first day was peaceful. I went for a hike, snapped a few photos, and by the time the sun was setting, I was sitting outside by the fire pit, listening to the crackling flames and sipping from a thermos of tea. The sky was clear, and the stars began to poke through the darkness, dotting the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a small flickering light deep in the woods, just past the tree line. At first, I thought it was a firefly, but it was too big. It moved slowly, gliding through the trees like it was looking for something or someone. I sat up, narrowing my eyes to focus. The light was faint but unmistakable. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, its glow barely reaching me through the dense pines. Then another light appeared beside it. Then another. 3 faint orbs flickering in unison, moving deeper into the forest. Glenn's warning about the lights echoed in my mind, but I shook it off. They were probably just campers in the distance, or maybe a reflection from a house far off the ridge. I wasn't about to let some old superstition spook me on my first night. I sat back, trying to relax, but the lights wouldn't leave me alone. They moved again, gliding slowly through the trees as if they were beckoning me to follow. I could almost hear a whisper in the air, like soft voices drifting on the wind. Come closer. I stood abruptly, shaking my head. No, I muttered to myself. You're not doing this. You came here to get away, not chase after stupid lights in the woods. But the longer I stood there, the harder it was to ignore them. They were so gentle, so inviting. It felt like they were calling me, pulling at some part of me that I couldn't explain. My feet shifted forward, inching toward the forest's edge. Come. I blinked, snapping out of it. What was I doing? I wasn't about to follow some strange lights into the woods. Glenn had warned me, hadn't he? I couldn't let myself get sucked into this nonsense. I backed away from the trees, heart pounding, and went back into my RV, slamming the door behind me. The lights flickered one last time outside the window before they disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I spent the morning hiking, trying to focus on anything but what had happened the night before. But the woods felt different now, quieter. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves had faded, replaced by a stillness that pressed in on me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees or the faintest flicker of light just out of sight. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting Glenn's warning get under my skin. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By the time evening came, the anxiety had settled into my bones. I lit another fire and sat outside, staring into the flames, trying to calm myself. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights came back. This time, they were closer. I watched, frozen, as they flickered between the trees. More of them now. 5, maybe 6, all moving in the same slow, rhythmic pattern. They circled the edge of the campground, their glow soft but persistent. I felt that same pull again, stronger this time, like invisible hands reaching out to me. Come. The whispers were clearer now, louder. They filled my ears, my mind, drowning out everything else. It sounded like his voice. Ryan, his soft, pleading tone, asking me to come closer, to follow. I stood, my body moving of its own accord. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. I needed to know what these lights were, where they were leading me. Maybe it was Ryan. Maybe he'd followed me, wanted to make things right. The thought was irrational, but in that moment, it made perfect sense. I took a step toward the forest, then another. My heart raced as I approached the tree line, the lights growing brighter, more vivid. But as I crossed into the shadows, something shifted in the air. The forest felt wrong, twisted, like the trees were closing in around me. The lights flickered erratically, their gentle glow turning sharp, jagged. I froze. The whispers turned darker, harsher. Come now. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't Ryan. This was something else, something wrong. I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest. The lights surged forward, surrounding me, blinding me. In desperation, I grabbed the pouch Glenn had given me, clutching it tightly. The lights flickered wildly, then dimmed. I backed away as the whispers receded, and the lights finally disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark woods, shaking. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own but had been carved out by something or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, the pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt, quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey, Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know, they feel weird, not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Hollow Creek's always been strange. You wouldn't be the first to think something's off here." "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place? Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful." I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. "Sounds like folklore to me." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone serious now, "but I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before, people who didn't listen to the warnings." I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts." Ethan sighed. "Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything." I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself. Just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I'd been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone, as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise, a low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant, unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. The sounds blended into the whispering wind at first, but then they grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach knotting with every step. The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge I felt it, vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface, something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again, harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof, if I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully descended into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that took my breath away. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then from the shadows I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something. Something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it. But the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried. Something that was still there, waiting beneath the earth. And I knew one thing for certain, I wouldn't be going back. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost story book I found at a thrift store, some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp, a few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old. Things broke. But the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement. Something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still, too still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it, faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them, handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong, but everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large, too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there in the dirt were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around, nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight. A loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer. Just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted, the fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign. Old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful," she smiled. "It always is here." "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" "For a little while," she said, her voice soft. "I come here every now and then, can't stay away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. Solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. "You here for the fishing?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. "No, just the lake, the quiet." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone, just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing. Just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground. And that's when I saw her, a woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie," I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure, but as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she'd been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night. A woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when I got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm. Too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time. Longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want. But she's real. And now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane." "Is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her. You know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water. That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming drifting through the night air. Then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please, come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long." I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in. But my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now, "before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable. And behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater. Her pale eyes followed me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. The Beast of Blackwater Ridge. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into Blackwater Ridge, Manala National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. "Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while." "Sure, Nate. We'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group, the one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough, well marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly, as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. "It's going to rain tomorrow," she said almost as an afterthought. "Clear skies right now," I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was weird. I'd been in plenty of forests, but something about this one felt off. "You guys hear that?" Nate said, glancing around nervously. "Hear what?" Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. "No, it's like, I don't know, like something moving out there." I paused, listening. At first there was nothing, but then I heard it too. Soft, distant and low. A growl, almost like the sound of a heavy breath. "Coyotes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them." But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. Maybe we should keep the fire going all night, he said. Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us. But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. What the hell? Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks. I crouched down next to her. She was right. The prints were huge, human-like but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. This isn't normal, she whispered. We should go back. The confident TJ who could handle anything suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. Nah, we're fine, I said, brushing it off. It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving. But I knew, we all knew, something was out there watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier, just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent. Something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. Do you hear that? Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, closer this time. What the hell is that? Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. It's just an animal, I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. But it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast. So fast I barely caught a glimpse. But I saw enough, a tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light, watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. I'm going to check it out. No, Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. Stay here. Don't be stupid. But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. Kara, I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness. Then I saw it. A tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. I always hated feeling tethered to anything, so when the relationship ended, I knew I had to get away. No more distractions, no more emotional baggage. I just needed a break. Crater Lake seemed perfect. Beautiful, isolated, and most importantly, quiet. I packed my old RV, grabbed some hiking gear, and headed out for a long weekend of camping. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to set behind the towering cliffs surrounding the lake. Crater Lake was as stunning as I'd imagined. Deep blue waters so clear they reflected the sky, encircled by jagged cliffs that loomed like ancient sentinels. The park was busy enough near the main viewpoints, but I was smart. I'd found a campsite far from the crowds, tucked away near the southeastern shore where the trees were thick and the lake was quieter, almost unnervingly so. It was just what I wanted, solitude. But as I parked my RV and set up camp, a strange feeling settled over me. The wind was too still, and even though the lake was calm, there was a low hum in the air, like the whisper of something just out of earshot. I shook it off, just nerves, I told myself, nothing to worry about. After all, I hadn't done a solo trip like this since before I met Sarah. The memories tugged at me, but I pushed them away. I spent the first evening by the fire, watching the stars come out as the lake turned to ink. Crater Lake was famous for its clarity, its mirror-like surface reflecting everything above it perfectly, but tonight the water looked different, darker, maybe even opaque. I stared out across the lake, trying to ignore the strange tightness in my chest when I heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind. Laughter, childlike, distant, but unmistakable. I sat up, listening harder. The night was still, but there it was again, faint but clear. I scanned the shoreline, looking for anyone else camping nearby. Nothing but fog creeping over the water and the flickering shadows of my fire. Probably kids playing somewhere across the lake, I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I was too far out. The ranger had said as much when I checked in. This spot was about as secluded as you could get. Besides, the laughter didn't sound right. It was high-pitched, but it echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off the cliffs and the water at the same time. Shaking my head, I stood and stoked the fire, trying to lose myself in the warmth. The sound died away after a few minutes, and eventually I convinced myself it was nothing, just the wind, or maybe my tired mind playing tricks on me. It had been a long drive after all. I crawled into the RV that night, settling in for what I hoped would be a peaceful sleep, but the unease stayed with me, clinging to my mind like the fog that now blanketed the campsite. I dreamt of the lake, shapes moving beneath the surface, dark and indistinct, like hands reaching up from the depths. The next day was better. I hiked along the rim of the lake, took in the views, and even managed to shake off some of the weird vibes from the night before. The sunlight was bright and reassuring, cutting through the mist, and the water looked clearer now, less murky. I convinced myself I'd just been tired. That was all it had been. By afternoon, I decided to take the kayak out. The water was calm, almost unnaturally so. The kayak sliced through the surface effortlessly, and for a while I let myself enjoy it. The silence of the lake was peaceful, broken only by the soft splash of my paddle. Then the ripples started. At first they were small, nothing more than the gentle rocking of water disturbed by a fish, maybe. But as I moved farther out, the ripples became more pronounced. They seemed to come from nowhere, disturbing the otherwise glassy surface of the lake. I stopped paddling, staring at the water, trying to figure out where they were coming from. There was nothing, no fish, no breeze, no sign of anything that could cause the water to move like that. But the ripples were there, spreading out from somewhere beneath the kayak. That's when I saw it. A dark shape, maybe 15 feet below, moving slowly. It was too large to be a fish and too humanoid to be anything I could easily explain. It floated there for a moment before drifting deeper, vanishing into the darkness. I blinked, gripping my paddle tighter. My heart raced, but I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was a log, I reasoned, or some weird optical illusion. I was looking through layers of water after all, and who knew how light refracted down there? But deep down, I didn't believe it. I paddled back to shore faster than I cared to admit, my eyes glued to the water the whole time, watching for any more signs of movement. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the sun was starting to dip, and the fog was rolling in again, thicker this time. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the trees, and with it came that faint sound again. Laughter. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I stood at the edge of the lake, staring out into the mist, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was definitely children's voices now, several of them giggling and splashing. But as I scanned the shoreline, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was no one there, no boats, no campers, just the fog hanging low over the water like a shroud. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I should have packed up right then, driven away and never looked back. But I stayed. Stupid, I know. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Crater Lake had its fair share of myths and legends, but I didn't believe in that stuff. I'd never been the superstitious type. Then I saw them, just shadows at first. Small figures standing at the water's edge, half obscured by the fog. They didn't move, just stood there, watching. They were small, like children, but their outlines were blurred, indistinct. I blinked, trying to focus, and in that split second they were gone. I stepped back from the shore, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't seeing things. They were there. I'd seen them. A cold chill washed over me as the wind died, leaving the air deathly still. The whispers started again, faint and melodic, drifting across the water, but this time they were louder, closer. I backed toward the RV, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those figures standing behind me. Nothing. I fumbled with the RV door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I sat there in the dim light, listening. The whispers grew louder, like they were pressing in on me from all sides. It was as if the voices were coming from the lake itself, echoing relentlessly. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but it didn't stop. The sounds seeped into my mind, becoming clearer, more distinct. I could hear the splashing of water and the soft giggles turning into cries. It was children drowning, calling for help. I could hear their little hands slapping against the surface of the water, their desperate gasps for air. My breath hitched, panic rising in my chest. I had to get out of here. I threw my gear into the RV, not caring about the mess, as I reached for the ignition. The RV's lights flickered and died. The engine wouldn't turn over. I cursed under my breath, frantically trying the key again and again. Nothing. I had to get out of here. I threw my gear into the RV, not caring about the mess, as I reached for the ignition. The RV's lights flickered and died. The engine wouldn't turn over. I cursed under my breath, frantically trying the key again and again. Nothing. Outside, the whispers grew louder. I could hear the faint tapping now, soft knocks against the RV windows. My blood ran cold as I turned. Handprints, small, wet handprints, appeared on the windows, slowly sliding down the glass. The whispers turned into cries. The tapping grew more frantic, louder, as if they were trying to get in, trying to pull me out to the water. I backed away, my mind spinning, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. The air inside the RV felt suffocating, thick with dread. Then I heard it, splashing, close, right outside, like something was struggling in the water. Without thinking, I rushed to the door, flinging it open. The fog was so thick now I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I could hear the splashing, the cries for help, the child's voice, desperate, calling for me. Help me, please. My legs carried me toward the lake before my brain could catch up. The water lapped softly at the shore. The cries were louder, more desperate. I could see something out there, flailing in the shallows, a small figure, arms reaching up, struggling against the current. I was almost at the water's edge when the fog shifted just enough for me to see it clearly. The child was translucent, its skin pale and waterlogged. Its eyes were wide, empty sockets. Its mouth was open in a silent scream as it reached for me. Wet, skeletal hands clawed at the water, pulling it closer to me. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The figure stopped struggling, its head tilting to one side as if studying me. Then it smiled, a cold, unnatural smile that chilled me to my core. I ran, my feet pounding the earth as I raced back to the RV. The laughter faded into the distance, echoing through the fog. I slammed the door behind me, locking it again, and collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The whispers, the laughter, the tapping on the windows, they didn't stop until dawn. When the sun finally broke through the fog, I packed up and drove away without looking back. I didn't care that the RV was barely running or that I left half my gear behind. I just needed to get away from that lake. But even now, as I sit in the safety of my apartment, I can still hear them sometimes. The faint whispers, the splashing of water, the laughter. Crater Lake isn't as quiet as it seems, and I know they're still there, waiting. I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I had spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side. The air was crisp and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even, but as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else, tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip, a few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I needed: high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. "Focus," I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then around midnight, I saw them. At first they were faint, flickering small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were, two, no three lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen dead. "What the hell?" I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for, the lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference, some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30° Fahrenheit? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger. Too large. I watched, heart-pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment, or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints, small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across, and they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest. Close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles, as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast, no way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now, they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long, and there between the branches I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light. Quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead, a welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow, and there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints. Dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal, and the frost melted away. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain Lights. But what I found was something else. Something I couldn't explain. And I knew deep down that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. The Great Smoky Mountains had always been a dream destination, a place of beauty, solitude and isolation where I could lose myself in the woods and maybe find myself again. After the breakup with Eric, I needed an escape, something to remind me that I was capable, that I could handle life on my own. Mark, of course, wouldn't let me do it alone. My brother insisted on coming along, and with him came Na, his bubbly girlfriend, and Lucas, a friend of his who seemed more interested in me than the mountains. The whole trip was supposed to be a solo adventure, but I caved. I figured I could handle them for a weekend. We set out early on Friday, and the trailhead was already buzzing with tourists, their laughter filling the crisp morning air. Mark led the way, checking his map obsessively while lugging around half a camping store's worth of gear. He liked to over-prepare for everything. Nah, naturally cheerful, hummed some pop song as she skipped along behind him. Lucas stuck close to me, his jokes falling flat, his flirtations rolling off me like water on rock. I was there for the hike. The Smokies were breathtaking, the way the mist clung to the rolling hills, the distant sound of water rushing through the trees, the deep green of the pines and ferns that hugged the path. If I could just let myself melt into that wilderness, I thought, I might forget the reason I came here in the first place. But that sense of peace didn't last long. By the time we reached the more remote trail where we planned to camp, the crowds had thinned out. It was just us, and I was grateful for the quiet, at least at first. But as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a strange heaviness settled over the forest. The cheerful calls of birds disappeared, replaced by an eerie stillness. Something feels off, I said, mostly to myself. You're just not used to the quiet, Lucas replied, a grin plastered on his face. This is the best part, just us and the wild. I nodded but couldn't shake the sensation. As we set up camp, Mark was his usual methodical self, making sure the tents were positioned perfectly and ensuring the fire pit was well constructed. Meanwhile, Lucas's tent wouldn't stay upright. The poles sagged despite his best efforts. Nia laughed at his struggle, but I could sense the rising frustration. You didn't exactly bring a 5-star hotel, huh? She teased. I didn't blame her for laughing. Lucas's tent was a joke, but when the wind picked up later that night, it was less funny. The flimsy thing shook and collapsed in on him. Halfway through dinner, Mark offered to help him fix it, but Lucas waved him off. I'll manage, he muttered, clearly embarrassed. I felt a twinge of guilt, but the night was closing in fast, and we all needed rest. We sat around the fire, the woods around us thick with shadows. The Smokies, which had seemed so beautiful just hours earlier, now felt ominous. We were miles from the nearest ranger station, out of cell service, with nothing but trees and mountains for company. And then, just as we were beginning to relax, we heard it, a distant scream. It was high-pitched, echoing through the valley. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The sound made my skin crawl. The sound made my skin crawl. Cougar, Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. Yeah, right, Lucas scoffed, throwing another log on the fire. That's the Wampus cat. He grinned as if he'd just cracked some hilarious joke, but no one laughed. I hadn't grown up around here, but I knew enough about Appalachian folklore to recognize the name. The Wampus cat was the stuff of campfire stories, half woman, half beast, cursed to stalk the woods and hunt down anyone who ventured too far from civilization. Don't joke about that, Na said, her voice wavering. People say they've seen it. Mark, ever the pragmatist, rolled his eyes. It's just a legend. Probably an owl or something. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fire cast long shadows, and every crack of a twig in the distance made my heart skip. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to focus on the warmth of the fire and Na's cheerful chatter, but the unease settled deep into my bones. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves outside my tent sounded too close. I kept thinking about that scream and the way it had seemed to echo from all directions. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next day, the tension between us started to show. Mark was irritable, frustrated that we weren't sticking to his planned itinerary. Na tried to keep the mood light, but her jokes felt forced. Lucas was quieter than usual, as though the previous night's collapse of his tent had deflated his bravado. It didn't help that the wildlife we encountered seemed wrong. Deer stood unnaturally still, watching us with glassy eyes. We came across a black bear in the distance, and instead of lumbering away as they usually do, It stood on its hind legs, staring at us for far too long. I didn't mention it to the others, but I noticed that every time we passed an animal, it was facing us, not the other way around. "They're just curious," Mark said when I finally pointed it out, but I wasn't so sure. By the time we made it back to camp that evening, a low fog had settled in around the trees, shrouding everything in a thick, wet blanket. My unease from the night before returned, stronger than ever. I set my gear down near the fire pit and wandered toward the edge of camp, drawn to the stillness that felt too unnatural. As I stood there scanning the woods, something moved in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow, a blur of movement between the trees. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again. Something humanoid, but not quite. It was tall, hunched, and moved with a feline grace. For a split second, I swore I saw glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from the shadows. "Hannah?" I jumped, startled by Mark's voice. "Yeah?" I lied, turning back to the fire, but I kept looking over my shoulder, searching the tree line for any sign of the creature. Nothing, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, the woods came alive with sound. The same scream echoed through the trees, but this time it was closer, louder. I could hear branches snapping in the distance, something big moving through the underbrush. Na woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's out there." Lucas sat up too, his face pale in the firelight. "It's the Wampus cat," he said, but this time there was no humor in his voice. I glanced at Mark, hoping for some reassurance, but even he looked rattled. "We need to stay together," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it is, it's probably just curious. Let's not provoke it." But as the night wore on, the sounds grew closer. Branches breaking, heavy footsteps circling our camp. I gripped the camping knife I kept in my pack, my hands slick with sweat. The fire crackled weakly, its light barely piercing the thick fog that had rolled in again. And then it attacked. It happened so fast. 1 minute we were huddled around the fire, and the next, something lunged from the shadows, knocking Lucas off his feet. He screamed, scrambling to get away, but the creature, whatever it was, slashed at him with claws I could barely see. Blood sprayed across the campsite, dark and viscous in the firelight. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing Na and pulling her toward the trail, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the thing that had attacked Lucas. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, half human, half mountain lion, its eyes glowing yellow as it crouched over him, growling low in its throat. "Hannah!" Mark yelled again, snapping me out of it. I ran. The four of us tore through the woods, barely able to see the trail in the thick fog. I could hear Lucas behind us, his footsteps growing fainter, his breath ragged. The Wampus cat was toying with us, letting us run, letting us think we had a chance. It let out another ear-piercing scream, and I knew it was coming for us. "We need to stop it!" I gasped, my lungs burning as I struggled to keep up with Mark and Na. "Fire!" Mark glanced back at me, his face pale with fear. "It's scared of fire." "We can't stop now," I said, but we didn't have a choice. The Wampus cat was right behind us, its footsteps growing louder, closer. I could see the glow of its eyes through the trees, the way it moved, darting between the shadows. We reached the edge of a clearing, and Mark stopped dead in his tracks. "Hannah, light it. Light everything." I fumbled with the matches in my pack, my hands shaking. We piled everything we had, gear, clothes, food, into a makeshift bonfire and lit it. The flames roared to life, casting long shadows across the clearing. For a moment, the Wampus cat hesitated, its eyes reflecting the firelight. It circled the edge of the clearing, growling low in its throat, but it didn't come closer. We stood there, panting, watching as the creature melted back into the shadows, its eyes the last thing to disappear. We stayed until dawn, huddled around the fire, too scared to move. Lucas never caught up. By morning we were exhausted, bloodied and broken, but we were alive. We never found Lucas's body. Mark didn't talk about what happened, and Na didn't speak much either. We made it back to the ranger station where they told us we'd probably been attacked by a bear. But I knew better. The Wampus cat was real, and it was still out there waiting for its next victim.